Welcome to the DEC Orientation and Engagement Panel. We're so glad to have you here today. I'm Burkett. I serve on the NADEC Board of Directors and also am the Executive Director for the North Alabama International Trade Association, which is a business-driven trade accelerator in Alabama that focuses on being a globally competitive community. I will be serving today as your moderator of our panel discussion. And today we're going to highlight some of the tools that are available to you as DECs to help engage your members and educate them on the importance of DECs, what DECs are supposed to do, or what DECs can do. And I'm very pleased to introduce our very experienced panel of international trade professionals. Each of today's panelists represents a different DEC and will guide you through the new member orientation and share best practices that are used by their respective DECs. I hope you will leave the session today with some new ideas on how to enhance your individual DECs, and we look forward to your questions and active discussion with today's panel. Our first panelist will be Brenda Stelly. Brenda is president of Oil Center Research International. The company manufactures over 1,000 environmentally friendly products in a wide array of lubricants, coatings, and detergents for oil field, industrial, automotive, marine, petrochemical, agricultural, healthcare, and nuclear power industries globally. She obtained an undergraduate degree from Boston University and an MBA from the University of Southwestern Louisiana. She serves as the vice chair of the Louisiana DEC, a board of director for NADEC, the World Trade Center of New Orleans, Louisiana Board of International Commerce, and is a member of the U.S. Department of Commerce's Industry Trade Advisory Committee on Small, Minority, and Women-Led Businesses, also known as ITAC 9. Our next panelist, Sandra Renner. She's co-founder and chair of FasTrack Global Expansion Solutions, a technology company whose product, FasTrack Globalizer, is a cloud-based application that facilitates a company's export and global expansion. She is also co-founder and president of Global Resource Associates, an international trade consulting and training company that was a recipient of the U.S. Presidential E-Award. Sandra previously served as Director of Export Development at Minnesota State Trade Office and was an appointed member of the Minnesota's Governor's Trade Policy Advisory Council. And she has taught international marketing courses at one of Minnesota's state universities. She has served as chair of the Minnesota District Export Council for many years, serves on the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition Minnesota chapter, is an associate member of NADEC, and previously served as one of the NADEC Midwest representatives. T. Persad is a lawyer and leadership consultant with various parties, including SMEs. He primarily represents clients in Florida and the U.S. Virgin Islands. He obtained his JD MPA from the University of Akron. He is also a graduate of the New York University and the University of Virgin Islands and holds a diploma in negotiation, leadership, conflict resolution from Harvard Law School, program on negotiation. He is a U.S. Army veteran, and he was recently appointed to the U.S. Department of Commerce ITAC 9 and serves as an associate member of NADEC and on the Central North Florida DEC. So at this point, I'd like to ask Brenda Stelly to come forward and talk about why it is so important that we have a DEC member orientation. And she has put together this presentation that can be adapted to your individual DECs to meet your needs. And so I'd like her to come forward and tell us a little bit about that.
So for me, this task was really important because when I joined my local DEC, Louisiana District Export Council, I didn't know anything about it. Donald Vanderwerken, I don't know if anybody remembers him, but he came to my office and said, look, I want you to be a part of this. And I didn't know anything about the Louisiana DEC. A lot of people say they joined their DECs to promote their business or for other reasons. I knew nothing. So I joined the Louisiana DEC, and I think it was probably 3 or 4 years later that I even realized there was a national DEC. It was never talked about. I didn't know they had annual conferences. So when I joined the board for NADEC, this was kind of near and dear to my heart to give everyone an overview and how everything relates. So I'm not going to read every slide, and excuse me if I'm taking a minute, because I don't know this computer very well, but, okay, tab, okay. And I can't find the tab key.
Right now.
Or the arrow, yeah. It's not switching, it's switching it on here, but not on there. Yeah, it's switching it on here, but it's not switching it on the screen. Okay. Okay, so basically if you are giving this to your deck, you would insert all of your information. I'm gonna say this once. And so district export councils are basically business leaders helping local companies export since 1973. The district export councils are made up of 8 regions. I did not divide up this map. A lot of people don't know why their region is the way it is, but these are the 8 regions. And then there are approximately 60 to 61 decks across the United States. The new ones have opened and some have closed. I think right now there are 61. The mission of the decks working with commercial service is basically to establish an export assistant network, expand export opportunities for U.S. companies, be a link between the community and commercial service, and coordinate activities with trade assistant partners like commercial service, USTR, ITA. The funding of the DECs is locally generated funds. There are no government appropriations. The history of the DECs, in 1960, President John F. Kennedy asked the Secretary of Commerce to increase exports, and this is kind of how the DECs came about. In 1974 is when they were formally established. 41 DECs were established under the authority of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Approximately 1,000 businesses and trade exports at the time were appointed to serve on the newly formed DECs. But today, there are 61 DECs, approximately 1,500 members. Their appointments are by the Secretary of Commerce, and DECs volunteer their time, sponsoring, participating in numerous trade promotion activities, sometimes trade missions, different activities or things that the Department of Commerce is promoting. Each DEC's executive committee works with their membership to create an annual strategic plan. It is not an advisory committee like the ITACs. They're not subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And they don't have security clearance. So DEC membership, there are different types of membership for DECs, but there are 35 members appointed by the Secretary of Commerce for staggered 4-year terms. This presentation will be on the website and it can be given out to you guys, so I'm not going to go over every detail. But this describes kind of the membership of the DECs. And there is a DEC policy and, yes?
Can you back up 2 slides?
Sure.
And hit that not subject to the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Is that the part where we are allowed to basically lobby?
We're allowed to lobby, but also we're not like the ITACs, Industry Trade Advisory Committees. So we as an ITAC member, we have security clearances. DEC members don't. So you don't have to abide by as many rules. You know, if I get an email, I can't send it out to anyone as an ITAC member. DEC is different. You guys can broadcast. We don't get cleared information. So that's another part of it. We have to go through a training, and that is, a lot of it is, it's about security of information. But also, we can't lobby on the Hill and as ITAC 9 members on behalf of ITAC 9, but I can as a DEC member.
So you have to remember which hat you're wearing.
I have to remember which hat I'm wearing. I would never mention ITAC 9 on the Hill, exactly.
Which ITAC?
Industry Trade Advisory Committee, and there are many. I don't know how many, like 12 or 13 or something. There's a lot. I'm on ITAC 9, which is small and minority-owned businesses. And this is a direct link, like we give our opinions on trade agreements to the president, to the Secretary of Commerce. So it's a direct link between business and government. But I'm diverted, so.
I'll just say one quick thing is that they did mention this morning that if you're interested in the ITAC, I believe there's a table out front, or you can check at registration because they are interested in anyone that might want to apply. It's a fairly lengthy
Or
process.
give me your card at the end of this, and I'll pass your information on to Ingrid Mitchell. She is like our designated federal officer, so if you're interested in ITAC, okay, so I'm going to skip ahead. So now we kind of discussed DECs in general. Now we're going to talk about the national DEC. So the mission of the national DEC is basically the same as the local DECs, to increase awareness and understanding of exports, the importance of it to the U.S. economy through education, legislative outreach, and engagement with DECs and other relevant stakeholders. Our purpose contributes leadership and international expertise to complement the U.S. commercial service. So we work hand in hand with U.S. commercial service. So the NADEC has 4 committees: trade policy, and legislative affairs, outreach and education, communications and events. I'm on the communications committee. You do not have to be a board member to get on one of these committees. If you're not on a committee, I highly encourage you to join because it's a great way to meet other people across the nation that are involved in exporting, and it's a great way to learn. So the purpose is to build a consensus to address important issues and accomplish the mission of the DECs. If you want to learn more about the NADEC, the website is usaexporter.org. There's tons of information on the website. So the NADEC board it consists of 16 board members. They're elected to the NADEC by DEC members. So once a year, Laura sends out a ballot to every DEC member, 1,500 people, and they vote, and that's how we get in place. And there are 4 more at-large members selected by the board of directors from the DEC membership. These 20 people are regular voting members. Then we also have the executive committee consists of the chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and communications officer. So we also have NADEC associates. They don't have voting rights. We have an advisory board. They also are non-voting, and they're appointed by the NADEC board for 4-year terms. I mentioned the committees. If you guys want to read more about it, this is on the website. And if you want a copy of the presentation, you're more than welcome to have it. It's been sent out a lot. So these are the other 2. And then, of course, everyone here knows about the NADEC conference. I'm not going to go into that. NADEC tries to develop partnerships with different organizations. So NASBIT and National U.S. Arab Chamber of Commerce, there may be another one in the works right now. Of course, if you want to get involved, you could be a sponsor. These are different ways to get involved with NADEC Joint Committee, run for a position on the board, attend the conference, fill out a member skills inventory, develop a partnership, become a mentor for other exporters, or be a sponsor. This, of course, is the website. It's got, if you have not been on the website, I absolutely encourage you, because it has every resource on it. Every past conferences on it, every paper, everything's on it. So we are a 501c6 federal income tax nonprofit for tax purposes. There are bylaws for the NADEC, and there are policies and procedures for the local DECs that Laura sent out to the local DEC. So this would be the part where you would insert your information. No, let me go back. There we go. All right. Do we want to ask questions?
So does anyone have any questions, burning questions right now? Okay, right.
Thank you very much for that. We use it in our deck, and it's a great organization to promote inclusion, however, you've got some icons in there that I think should be changed. This, you've got one of the 48 contiguous states, and you've got one with the contiguous states in Alaska and Hawaii. We have Guam, we have Puerto Rico, we have, CNI.
Okay,
If you can
so,
find another American symbol, that would be.
okay.
We will work on that. I'll get with the
So,
website.
The 48 states, okay, I got it right here, I'll make a note. That's why I brought a copy.
So this presentation is on the website. This was developed by Brenda and Sandy to give to local DECs so that you can take all of this information. So if you've never done this for your DEC, it's a great tool to use to introduce your DEC to the DEC and also the NADEC. And make that, like Brenda said, she didn't even know there was a NADEC when she joined the DEC. Wasn't sure what the DEC was, but she was exporting, and so they put her on the DEC. So take this information, you can massage it, whatever, but I really appreciate you putting this template together.
It's meant as a template, it's, you change it how you like it and tailor it to your deck. So it's meant as a template, not just strictly popular.
Yes, we have a question.
Thank you for that. I'm trying to go to the block, so like driving on my spot, hold on, I just came to help out on finding around here. So I did notice you had one of the points there was the requirement of 50% exporters. Can you expand on that?
That is in the bylaws for the NADEC. I think 50% has to be exporters. There's a certain percentage that can be
Service companies.
Service companies, yeah. So physical products or.
They want to keep a good balance of exporters and service providers and not have it
All freight, they want freight forwarders and attorneys, but they don't want all freight forwarders, all attorneys, so.
That makes sense though, because my philosophy is if someone is already exporting to that level, there's not a whole lot that we can do for them. Yeah, maybe we can take it to another level. But the ones that really need are the ones who are starting to export or learning how to export or afraid to export. I really think that that's where we can come into play.
And that's why they want
I'm
exporters
glad
on
to
the
see
board.
that comment,
Yeah.
because we're talking about some programs, that are done in the block, spread out on stuff. What we want to do is just mixers, network mixers for businesses. So I'm saying we should invite non-member calls, so.
Oh, absolutely. And we do to our programs for sure.
So that leads to my question. So your presentation, Brenda, was great. Are you using it actively to recruit non-members or portions of it?
I don't think it's been used actively to recruit non-members. This is more of
Internal?
well, it went out to all the DECs across the nation to use to onboard and educate new members, just how all the regional, the national, the local, how it all relates and what each one does, basically.
We have used it from our deck. We developed something very similar like in 2014, and we did use it for recruiting because that was like the first thing that people would say, what does the deck do? What does the deck do? Well, what is the deck, And so we did use it in this like last go round. We added 20 new members to our deck, so it was great. It was like a big job to do that outreach and to.
It's actually
But
making
we-
my wheels spin now.
Yeah, but we did use that, not exactly in the same format that it is now, but that information because people, I mean, it's just it's very helpful to have something.
Yeah, they want to know what they're getting into.
Yes, right.
As opposed to Brenda, who really didn't care what she was getting into. She just got.
Yeah, exactly. But we should develop like a little flyer to
Yes.
recruit people for
Right,
this.
from that.
You're absolutely right. I'll put a note about it.
Because even the history of the deck, I think people have a frame of reference, there's a context then for why you're being asked to participate in the deck, so.
I'm a new member in Nebraska, and wondering, is there a number for the deck member also in terms of population, in terms of exporters, like ratio, or the more the better?
There is a cap for each deck.
It's 32.
Yeah.
32 or 35, I believe.
And
Maybe
then,
it's 35.
yeah, and then they want at least half of it to be have to people be exporters on the deck.
And the people that are on the decks, local decks, they have to be confirmed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. So, I mean, it is a big honor and it is a process, so.
You have to fill out an application.
Okay, question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Has there been a way to measure the impact of the deck in terms of their like what they do, their outreach, and how, has that ever been measured?
Well,
Understand that?
commercial service, any program that we participate in, so commercial service and the deck works hand in hand for everything. So like every trade mission that the deck has put on with commercial service, we get a questionnaire that we have to fill out to say like how many jobs it created, how much sales. So in terms of deck completely separate, I don't know any way to measure it. I just know that every program that we participate in gets measured. I mean, we put on a BIS seminar, the deck in our state, and you know, it's measured by how many participants you get and how much revenue you generate. So yeah, there are certain ways.
And every deck can be different, and they're all led by the executive secretary, which is the U.S. Commercial Service employee. They kind of organize the deck in their state or in their region. So that's where the hand in hand comes in. And probably the 3 decks that we have represented all have a different story in a different way. And I think when we bring T up here for his PowerPoint, he's going to talk a little bit about how you can measure that. So we'll save that, a little more information for that for a little later. One question that came up was, how do the missions of the local, regional, and national decks correlate? And I think Sandy had an example she could provide on that.
Yeah, I think, thinking about national, regional, local, you know, from the local decks, they're expert at what's going on in their local communities. Who are the exporters, what are the challenges, who are the other export promotion organizations, who are the different groups that you collaborate with. And then when you move up to, say, the regional, I think that's where it gets maybe a little bit, not as maybe clear, like how you regional, as a region, how do you collaborate with those decks in your region. And then when you get to the national, then it becomes a little bit more clear because it's a national organization of every deck member in the country. So thinking about it, it's sort of a bottom-up, top-down kind of a relationship. And in the middle, where you have the regional cooperation or the regional collaboration, that's kind of where that bottom-up and top-down, if that regional piece is strong, then that makes the other 2 parts work better. Because if in your region, all of the decks are on the regional call. So for example, some regions have a quarterly call and their deck chairs are invited to that quarterly call. In our region, in the Midwest, we have a bi-monthly call. And in the past, it's been the deck chairs that are on that call. And a while back, we discussed, why is it just the deck chairs? Why don't we expand that to the entire executive committee? Because after those calls, there should be some takeaways that are, you know, action items. But if it's just always the deck chair, then how does that action item always get done? So we're expanding the Midwest region, those regional meetings where all of the executive committee members will be invited. So there's kind of like those 2 things where it's a way for the local decks to always be informed of what's going on at the national level, you know, through that participation in that regional call. And also, over the last couple of years, from the local level, pushing information out. We've had from the national, they've listed a lot of the local deck webinars and programs on that website. So there really is a pretty good, you just have to make it work however your region is set up.
So what is the role of the executive secretary, which is the U.S. commercial officer, in comparison to the DEC? Because I believe he told us that he was not a DEC member.
No. He is not a deck member, he cannot vote, but he convenes and he puts the applications through the process. He's our commerce or he or she is our commerce representative that collects. He will identify, along with the DEC members, potential new DEC members, and then he will get the applications, submit those to Washington for confirmation.
But as far as meetings go,
Yeah, they organize the meetings, they set up the meetings, and they're the source of information. They send information out to us, like a monthly kind of update. But yeah, Aaron, our executive secretary, keeps a calendar of events going on, what we're gonna participate in.
And I think it depends office by office too, because like in our case, our executive secretary doesn't do that. We arrange our DEC meetings and we, put the agenda together. He comes to all the meetings and is a great resource. We have weekly calls. Our executive committee does weekly calls, 9:30 on Monday morning, and he joins in those calls all the time. So he's a great resource, but he doesn't. Our DEC is more independent as far as scheduling the meetings, finding the venue, making all the arrangements. So we don't have.
One thing I want to interject, like our DEC just got DEC of the Year, and you heard Aaron Butler up there talking. She does so much, like coming up with the idea of trade talks, and export boot camp, and when she talks to our new members, they gave her some input on, they wanted to do like working group meetings, so they had one like last week. So Aaron, ours is very active, organizes so much, does so much for our DEC. We all help. I mean, I helped to get one of the speakers for the trade talks. I ran into our Senator Cassidy in the elevator, talked to him, and it opened a dialogue. I participated in, the boot camp.
Working with your congressional reps is something that the DEC members need to do because the executive secretary cannot.
Right. Yeah. And that is a good example, like from the Midwest calls, we talked about all the issues related to supply chain and the issues related to containers, big thing in the Midwest. And we've sort of taken that on as a regional issue. And on Wednesday, we had an appointment with Jay from the North Dakota DEC, and I met with Senator Fulcher because she's trying to put forth the legislation on the Shippers Act to try to get their, free up this problem with all the containers. And so we had a meeting with her. So North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota are all kind of teaming up as trying to put this, a lot of input into that act. That hopefully now I guess it's in the House, and so that is an initiative of our Midwest DECs as well.
So I'm going to take us back to one of the questions that we had about benchmarking and results. And I'll ask T. Persad to come forward, or I can do the slides.
I'm happy sit here, I can come forward with you.
Why don't you come up here? I think that would be easier. That way we'll know when to move the slides.
Hi. How are you guys? How many of you guys are new? How many of you guys enjoy what you do? Geez, I thought every hand would go up in this room. So I'm in the Central North Florida DEC. I joined the DEC in January of 2020, and on Friday the 13th, March 13th, that was the last working day for me in the office for a while, because on Sunday, March 15th, there was an announcement that no one should leave their home. Remember that day? And so we were fortunate enough to have one live event with the DEC in January. And since then, we have not had a live event until earlier on this year. And so, as a new member coming into the DEC, it was very difficult to be engaged. It was very difficult to know what's going on. It was very difficult to know what you had to do, what your responsibilities were, who the people involved were. It's kind of hard to build rapport. It's kind of hard to get engaged and get excited about something when you don't have that opportunity to press the flesh, to meet the people, to look them in the face and force a smile out of them just because you're standing with them, you know. And that type of thing is sort of almost necessary for us to have some engagement. And so it was very difficult in 2020, and you all experienced the same things. On top of that, you had your lives, you had families, you had someone at home that was relying upon you to do X, Y, and Z, and you had your children, and you had your regular job to do. And so the debt was the last thing on all of our minds, because everything else took priority. And so it was challenging. It was very challenging for our debt to transition out of that into a sense of normalcy. I've been doing some work with businesses using what's called the business model canvas. That was a tool designed in 2009 by a couple of college professors and has been used since, and it's actually taught in the MBA program in some of the top schools, and has been used by several government agencies to help not only innovate within those organizations, but to raise engagement. And I said to Oz, who was our chair during that year, said, would you like me to introduce this to the DEC? After talking to him a little bit about it and explaining the model and the process to him, he said, sure, I will introduce it to the executive council and see what they think, and they thought it was a good idea, so we introduced it. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you today about. The business model canvas was adopted. Some of the elements were changed to make it applicable in the public sector, and instead of a business model canvas, it turned into a mission model canvas. Now, the mission model canvas has some great things about it. One of the best things about it that I find is that you can actually fit it on one page. So it gives you a great tool that you can use to simplify organizational leadership, innovation, and engagement. And so what this does is it forces you to put yourself in a position where you're thinking about all of the critical elements of the organization. And so it took us some time to get this process on the road. First, we had to get some buy-in from the executive leadership of the DEC, and then the DEC members themselves. And then once we had the buy-in, then we had to have someone actually take ownership of the project. And when someone took ownership of the project, we had to make sure that they had the technology and the support, and not only the technological support, but the human resources support and the intellectual support that they needed to actually get that through the process. And so we had a lot of good feedback from the DEC members doing it. And so this is comprised of 9 building blocks, basically. The first building block is probably the most important building block, and that is the building block that deals with the customer segment in the business model canvas, but adapted to the mission model canvas. That is the segment that deals with the stakeholders or the beneficiaries. So identifying the stakeholders and the beneficiaries of the DEC becomes the primary function of this model. We have found, and you guys all have experienced it, you're experiencing it today, you start talking about ideas, great ideas. Everyone has a great idea. We are all smart people. Everyone who is engaged in the DEC has a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge, and they have great relationships. And so that brings a lot of ideas to the table. But how do we know which idea is the best idea? How do you know which idea actually works? So what this model does is forces you to first start at the beneficiary or stakeholder stage to actually build a profile for that stakeholder or beneficiary, so that you have a good understanding of the jobs that stakeholder beneficiary has to do, the functional jobs, the emotional jobs, the societal jobs, the problems that they have to solve, the pains that they're experiencing relative to that job and otherwise, whether those jobs are financial, the pains are financial pains, emotional pains, roadblocks, time-related pains, or any other pains that you may not be aware of, and the gains that they're looking for. So when you start building that profile and the underlay of that profile, identifying the tribe that they belong to and the cultural issues that are involved, the belief systems and the needs, then you really have a good idea of what's important to them. And only when you do have a good idea of that profile and what's important for them, should you be working on the value proposition. And so although all these ideas are great, the ideas usually come before the identification of the stakeholders or the beneficiaries, and so there's no focus. And so you find many people within the organization going in different directions. And because they're not going in the same direction, it's hard to have engagement in one subject versus the other. So we use this as a test. And so because this was a new concept, it had to be sold to the members of the local DEC. And so we used a different process to sell it. Usually the traditional process is strategic planning. And strategic planning assumes that there's a problem. And there's a problem with either the system, with the business, with the technology, with the people, and you set out to solve the problem. And so we took a different approach. We said, well, there's no problem with the DEC, there are no problems with the people on the DEC, there are no problems with the system. So let's look at what's good about the people, let's look at what's good about the DEC. Let's take it from a point of appreciation versus problem identification. And so we started to do more of that in our communication. And so with the appreciation and focusing on people's strength, then we focused on future pacing the organization. What do we want the organization to look like in 5 years? What does that vision look like? And then with that future pacing and those strengths, we set out to identify the stakeholders and the needs for the stakeholders and build a value proposition around that. And so the rest of the canvas deals with just that. Once we have identified the stakeholders, we start building the value proposition. And the value proposition deals with the goods and services that we're providing to the stakeholders. Once we've identified the goods and services we're providing to the stakeholders, then we try to figure out how we're going to get buy-in and support for these value propositions. And then once we get that done, then how we're going to actually deploy this value proposition throughout the DEC and beyond the DEC. That portion of the canvas, which is in sort of like a brownish orange color, is about desirability. Because if the program that you're designing, if this innovative idea that you have is not desirable, then it's going to fail from the beginning and no one's going to be engaged. And so when we think about this portion of the canvas, we necessarily are able to complete the rest of it in a very logical way. But the problem is that I have found, and I think we found this throughout the DEC within our local areas, that people had great ideas, but they were not addressing a unified need or a dominant need or any of the issues that were really important to the DEC members, and so obviously people weren't excited about it. So once we've identified those things, then we talk about the feasibility of it. And the feasibility of it is, can we get it done? Do we have the resources to get it done? Are we able to do the activities necessary to get this done? And who are the key partners that we need in the process to actually work with, to actually execute on this value proposition? Of course, that's the feasibility aspect of it, because if it's desirable and it's not feasible, then we may be spinning our wheels. And then finally, at the bottom of it is the viability process. And are there going to be costs associated with it? We usually only think about the financial costs associated with it, but as you all know, it is much more than that. There's time costs associated with it. We all have families. We all have regular jobs. Our regular jobs take us away for 10 to 14 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. And the rest of the time we try to dedicate to our families. So how is it that DEC members are able to dedicate that time to get those things done? So we have to analyze the financial cost, the emotional cost, the time cost, the opportunity cost, and everything else that goes along with it. And once we've analyzed that and identified those things, then can we actually identify what the measurable goals are and what does the mission accomplished look like? And so this viability portion of it is important as well. And so Oz was our president at the time. He approved this, took it to the board, and Chris Laggett, who's behind in the audience, he's our current chair, and he made it one of the chief things to do this year, to actually continue utilizing this model to continue to develop value propositions for the DEC and push them on. So these are some of the main results that we come up with using it for our local DEC. So we've identified 3 primary stakeholders. Now, to be certain, we identified 8 stakeholders when we came up with this process, but then we went through a prioritization process, and in that prioritization process, we found that all of the DEC members ranked overwhelmingly these 3 stakeholders and beneficiaries in this order. And the basic tenet was that if we don't take care of our deck members, it's going to be very difficult for our deck members to take care of the SMEs and the interest of the Department of Commerce. And so it really shifted the way we thought quite a bit. And so as a result of this, we started focusing on the deck members. And obviously, when we started focusing on the deck members, that raised engagement. And so this is what the value proposition canvas is. On one end of the canvas, you're focusing on the profile for the members. That is, when we look at the members themselves, and you as members, when we look at you, what are the jobs that you have to do? We separated those jobs into jobs that are related to your regular work, jobs that are related to your family, and jobs that are related to the deck. And we try to see how you prioritize those decks, or in our case, how we as deck members prioritize that. And we try to address those issues that the deck found were priority members based on the data that we got from the deck members, and how they were being balanced with the jobs that people had with their families and with their regular jobs. We identified the pains that they had, ranked those, and then we identified the gains that they were looking for. And some of the data surprised us. While the majority of us were thinking that the data really dealt with one subject matter, we were surprised to find that it dealt with other subject matters. And then, of course, we utilized that and then started to create a value proposition around it. And so these are the top 3 pains and gains that we identified. For the top jobs that they had was, they wanted us to identify how they can serve, how they prioritize their time, energy, and resources. It seems obvious, doesn't it? It seems blatantly obvious. But that is something that the deck did not necessarily focus on at the beginning, at least not when I was there. And talking to the people who have served in the deck for a number of years, this is not something that they paid much attention to. The other job was they wanted to integrate with other deck members, other decks, and the NAITA and the business community. Again, that seems blatantly obvious, right? But there weren't any core programs within our local deck to tackle that particular issue, except from the Executive Council. And then they wanted to feel useful and helpful to the deck and exporters. There were members of our deck who just didn't feel that they were being useful at all. And because they didn't feel they were being useful, they didn't feel they were utilized the way they wanted to be utilized, or thought they were going to be utilized, their engagement dropped. No surprise there, right? And so then we started to develop some value propositions of that, around that. And so the top 3 were these 3. They wanted the deck to provide opportunities to use and leverage their knowledge, skill, experience, resources, and expertise. And so they wanted the deck to identify the strengths and use them when their strengths apply, and wanted the deck to tell them what the deck wanted them to do. Again, it seems obvious when you're looking at it here, right? But how many of you in your decks actually focus on these things? Show hands, how many of you focus on these things? Not one hand in the room. And so had we not done this exercise, we would have continued to ignore the deck members as a stakeholder. We would have continued to divert our attention to other things. And when we divert our attention to other things, there's no unity of thought, there's no unity of action, there's no unity of leadership. And as a result of the fragmentation, there's a lack of engagement. And so the value propositions that we came up with, and this was, you can see the session up there in September the 21st of 2021, that would be. So the first thing that we decided to do was to create, identify, promote targeted opportunities for the deck and its members to have an increased engagement with exporters, including creating a matchmaking program based on geographic location, product types, and services and expertise. The second was to provide opportunities for deck members to use and leverage their knowledge, skills, resources, expertise, and experience by first identifying each member's strengths and identifying opportunities for them, then using each member strategically when their strengths apply. Again, gee, that seemed blatantly obvious, right? Was it blatantly obvious, right? So one of the things that we started doing was creating blogs for the members. And so what we would do is we would invite the members to come into a studio, and we would sit and we would ask them questions about themselves. Tell us about John Doe, about your experience. Let's get a good overview of your professional life cycle. Tell us about your experience with exporting. Tell us how long you've been exporting. Tell us which countries you've been exporting to. Tell us your challenges with exporting. Tell us some of your tips and tricks with exporting. And then finally, tell us your number one tip for people who are interested in exporting. And so going through that exercise gave us the opportunity for, number one, to learn about our members in a very comprehensive way, to create a video that we can post and we can share with other members so other members can learn about their colleagues. And then three, so that the business community can learn some more about the DEC members. And third, identify, create, promote strategic partnerships with DEC and its members, including internal strategic partnerships and exploring and seeking external strategic partners. And so that's where the focus jumps into play, to develop programs to go into schools and work with the schools, to work with the universities, to work with quasi-government organizations, to work with other programs in the community where the members of the DEC can actually utilize their knowledge, their skills, their expertise, their experience to push forward the ultimate mission of the DEC. And so I've been asked to answer a few questions by Anne, and a few of those questions I think revolve primarily around the benefits that we've seen as a result of this program. And Chris, I'm going to pick your brain for a minute, if you don't mind, since you were a big part of this project. I can tell you some of the benefits that I've seen personally is, number one, I learned about each member of the DEC in the process. I wouldn't have had that opportunity if we didn't go through this exercise. I was like you, the new kid on the block, and I knew nothing about anyone. I knew nothing about what was supposed to be done, what my role and responsibilities were, what everyone else was doing. This gave me the opportunity to learn all of that information.
I wish we had this, because when I joined just a few months ago, I was trying to find out what it does and things like that. Okay, you know, COVID for a year, whatever, but still. And that's when I said, you know what, we really need to break this down. We gave them some basic questions. I wanted to know why they got involved with that. And you know, what was the interest? If you're active, what's keeping that interest? If you're not active, why are you not active? I mean, in fact, I met one of them yesterday.
Can you guys hear me about that? Okay, sorry, Chris.
One of them, I met one of my colleagues. I've been a member for over 2 years, a 2-year member. Never been with. But fortunately, this person came to me, so I'm glad you have this thing, so we don't need to. It does not make sense in reinventing the wheel, and this is what we need. And my thing was, you know, I'm pretty active with charity stuff. I don't want to be there for a title. I don't want to waste my time. And that's how I felt like they were saying.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, to be quite frank with you, one of the big impressions for members of the DEC, especially leadership of the DEC, was some of these people are here because they want to put this on their resume. And it's a resume builder. And you know what we found out? No one was there to use it as a resume builder. Every single person there was there because they wanted to actively engage with the export community and help others to export U.S. goods and services, and to help others succeed. Every single one there.
I think you're 100% correct, because the people that I spoke with, the same thing. They want to come and help. That's why they're there.
Yeah.
Where on here is the interaction with U.S. commercial service?
Yeah. So this is not, this is a model. And so when you start going down this process, you look at the stakeholders. And so the first stakeholder we dealt with were the DEC members themselves. When you look at the U.S. Department of Commerce and all those other things, we did have we did have that organization as one of the stakeholders, and so we had to prioritize the stakeholders. And so when you're finished working for the value proposition for one stakeholder, you move on to the other stakeholders. And so, yes, they were on the list, I think number 4, I think, in terms of the stakeholders. And so when as we travel through this process, we will get to them, but we will get to them when we are in a position where we can make meaningful contributions. All right, anyone else? So Chris, you have any thoughts on what your experience was? Since, you know, I looked at it from a different point of view since I was the facilitator for the program, and you were participating at the time before you became the chair.
Yeah, this was a really great initiative. I think it served 2 purposes. One was to get people already engaged by showing that the DEC leadership, I was vice chair of trade policy at the time, that we were actually interested in what motivated them to join the DEC, as well as provide a really great validation of what we might have thought. I mean, we've heard T quite a number of times throughout this presentation saying, you know, these things are kind of obvious. They are obvious. They are things that we thought were probably true, but we didn't have anything to validate it. And so the exercise that T went through in leading on this initiative really did provide us with the validation we needed. It was also not done in isolation. Another one of the great initiatives of T was to have a huddle every few weeks that would enable us to talk about key issues that were topical to us. He'd have an issue for us to talk about. This eventually led into the Business Mission Model Canvas initiative, but it's all part of what we were doing as a DEC to try and make ourselves more relevant to members, because as T has said, in order to be able to serve our community, we have to serve ourselves first, make sure that everybody has that opportunity to feel engaged. And this was really key. It is a start of a process. It's not the end of a process, because now we're working on implementation. As you can see from this, we were doing sessions. I think we didn't get it really done until October of last year, so it's pretty fresh for us. But it does provide us now with guidance, and it has certainly made my assuming the chair of the Central North Florida DEC a lot easier, having something like this to work from instead of having to just come at it fresh and kind of guess at what it is that our membership wants.
Thank you, Chris. So this process takes about 20 to 30 hours worth of time, and it can be done in a long weekend at a retreat. It can be done in 1 week, breaking it up a little bit more. It can be done over a period of a month or several months. We took the approach of dedicating 2 hours every month to doing this, so that we can actually get the members to attend. I think we had over 75% of the people who attended this session on a regular basis. They weren't always the same people all the time, but we always had overlap. And so to have a 75% engagement, I thought was pretty good. In any nonprofit organization, especially a volunteer nonprofit organization, to get that type of engagement is pretty good. And so, because of the success that we've had with our local DEC, we introduced this to the national DEC, and maybe Anne can share some thoughts about how that helped with the national DEC. Thank you.
Yes, this was a great initiative to do, especially during COVID when we were all isolated. It really got everybody engaged, and the National DEC has started the process as well, and so we have some good data. And some of you may have even received our survey that we sent out last year, and we got some good input from that. So we've talked about, how to orient new DEC members. We've talked about how to identify potential DEC members. We've talked about how to get them engaged. And I had another question is, sometimes people ask, how can a DEC member get involved in the NAITA? Does anybody want to answer that question?
I think, as Brenda said earlier, you don't have
Push the microphone.
Okay. You don't have to be a member, an elected member or an appointed associate member to be involved. I think you can't chair one of the committees if you're not a member, but you can be on the committees. So that would be communications, trade policy, education and outreach, and what am I missing?
events,
events, yeah.
like today.
So it would be, it is very, rewarding to work at the national level and on any of these things. And so whatever your interest would be, if you go to the website, you see who the people are that are chairing the committee, and there's an email address there, I believe. So I think you can just reach out to any of those committee chairs.
And everybody here has already attended a conference, so you have your foot in the door, you know.
If you're interested in more involvement, yeah, please just reach out to us and let us know you'd like to.
Encourage your other DEC members to come to the conference, because this is really where you learn and network.
I think one thing too, just getting back on, like when you go through the strategic session or planning, however, whatever process you use, we just sort of did that at the beginning of the year, and we had to make quite a few changes to our committees because of the new members, what they were seeing as areas where they could contribute, and we reshaped our committees as a result of that. So I think that's another thing, because sometimes can have committees that have been in existence for a long time, and those committees don't really change. Maybe the people change, but not the actual committees. So we found that we are adding actually a Midwest collaboration committee. So we have a person who's going to head that up. And then we used to have our congressional outreach with our regular outreach committee, but we're we have someone who really wants to just focus on that. And so we're doing a congressional outreach just as a separate committee. So that was just one thing. We haven't changed up our committees for a while. So
That's a great way. You can get their input, you're allowing them ownership. One other thing I wanted to mention, kind of off the topic of the question, but we were talking about how do the local DECs, regional NADEC, how does it all correlate? To me, the most important thing is the local DECs are involved with local businesses. They know their exporters in their region, and they are who brings everything to their region and to the NADEC. So you guys know the topics, know what's going on, and we need this collaboration to really be relevant and provide what's needed. So the connection to your local exporters from the local DECs is that's to me why we're all on the district export council.
So at a local level, there's more one-on-one leadership and team leadership. At the national level, it's more about synergy between the organizations. And so I have found in my short time being in the DEC system, working at the local DEC, it's a great opportunity for people who are greater legal organizations to step up and exercise some of that one-on-one leadership, where they can help other members of the DEC to be more engaged, to be more active, and to be more productive, and then also the other exporters in their community. It's also an opportunity to serve in some committees and exercise some team leadership. It doesn't necessarily have to be positional leadership. It can be knowledge leadership, task leadership, and skill leadership. For this project, I didn't serve on a leadership position in any committee. I just happen to have the knowledge and the skill and the experience dealing with this model. And so this was more of a task leadership issue for me. So you can exercise that task leadership at the local level. And then my engagement at the national level was really more about synergy and how can we think about ideas that will help all of the DECs synergize with each other and help the national DEC further that goal of getting them to work together in a very effective way.
And just to reiterate, we are here to help the local DECs. So one of the ways that we have done that, and especially during this COVID period, is that we have implemented a series of webinars, and you heard about those earlier in the conference, or maybe we did make that announcement. We have really two tracks. We have trade issues, and then we have DEC engagement, DEC best practices. And so if there's something that you want to know more about, the Education Committee is very active and would like to put together programs, or if you have an area of expertise you would like to share, please share that with any of us on the NAITA board, or you can go directly to our Education Committee chairs that are listed on the website. But I encourage you to do that so that we know what to provide that you would like to hear more about. If you want to hear more about anything we've talked about today, we can go into more in depth. And before we conclude, I just got the 1-minute warning. Sean Levison, our chair, asked me to make an announcement that many of the local DECs may have questions about directors and officers insurance. And so they have, the NADEC has put together a program where you can get that insurance through the NADEC at a much reduced cost. And so we will be sending more information out about that, but I think that's important for members on NADEC to know that they are covered should there be some problems.
Can I ask a question? How many decks do have D&O insurance?
I do not know, but we will probably be finding out.
I don't know.
I'm the one that went to Sean on that question.
Okay.
Yesterday. We
Well,
had a
we-
program a couple of years ago where the National Bank was working with some underwriter, and I was trying to find out what underwriter that was. I'm the New York deck,
Okay,
and I was interested in finding out who that insurer was before you were doing it.
okay. Well, it looks like it's moving forward. So more information to come. Just wanted to make you aware of that. I want to thank our panelists today. Help me get them. Thank you all for being here, and I hope that you will take this information back and massage it to fit your deck and become more engaged both at the local and the national level. Thank you.